Whether you're chilling at the lake or sweltering in the city, if you're craving those DIY decor lake vibes, I got some DIY ideas for you. Let's get our DIY on.
For this first DIY, you're going to need 2 cork heating pads. Then you're going to want to pop onto Canva and find yourself a lobster and crab image in graphics. Download these as an SVG with a transparent background and then let your Cricut do its job. You're actually going to want to cut these images out twice, once larger so that it fits the entire pad and the other one about 1/4 of the size. Weed out both the larger and the smaller images, separate them and cut them down with a pair of scissors. Using some transfer tape, burnish that down really well so that everything sticks. Then separate the image from your transfer tape and then very carefully place it into the center of your cork pad. Now this is going to be difficult to do because the vinyl isn't going to want to stick to the cork board, but if you just do it very gently and very carefully, you will eventually get it onto that pad. Next, you're going to want to choose your chalk paint. I'm going in with Folk Arts Seaside Villa. And with a dry stenciling brush, you're just going to want to pounce that up and down onto your cork pad using that Seaside Villa and just getting that paint around your stencil and then working your way out. Let that dry. For the next cork pad, I'm going in with the lobster with white. Now, after that dries, you do want to apply a second coat to both of these cork pads. And then once the chalk paint has had enough time to set up, using a pair of tweezers, just carefully remove the vinyl image. Now you're going to want to repeat the same process, but this time with the smaller cutout vinyl images. So transfer those with transfer tape, burnishing it down really well, placing it on top of I went with the top corner of, I guess there's not really a corner with a circle, but you know what I mean. The top part of the cork pad, and then again, just very carefully remove that. Paint them like you did the other 2 sides, and then carefully remove those using tweezers and your Cricut tools. I don't know how well these are going to work with heat, but I am definitely going to try and I'll update you later. But regardless, these look so cute and you could totally just use them as decor. For this next DIY, I'm just going to use some of these wood rounds with glass inserts, and they have these painted images on top that you can easily remove with a cotton pad and a little bit of nail polish remover. Now, you all know I am a fan of twine, but I'm not really a fan of hanging wall art with twine. So since these came with twine hangers, I just removed those quickly. I wanted to add a little bit of interest to the top of these frames, so I had these half wooden beads that I bought from Amazon, and they're going to do the trick. Space these out so that they fit perfectly around your circle, and then just go in with a little bit of Lepage wood glue and apply it to your wooden frame. Once each of your wood beads has had a time to set up with that wood glue, go in with a little bit of white chalk paint and distress paint the entire wood round. With a smaller brush, go in and carefully get the inside part of your wood round. Again, you're not going for perfection here, you're going for like a worn look, so you don't have to be perfect about this, but you definitely want to avoid that glass. Likewise, for the outside rim of your wood frame, you're not going for full coverage here, you're going for that worn rustic look, so with the dry paintbrush, just brush that on and then set it aside to dry. While that paint is drying, pop again onto Canva and find yourself a couple of sailboats, download those images with SVG and a transparent background, and then cut that out on your Cricut machine. I just used some plain cardstock here. I didn't go for the transferable vinyl. You definitely could if you wanted to. Using a pair of scissors, I just separated the sailboats from each other, centered each of them on the back of the glass wooden round, and then taped those into place. Now I still have some of this beautiful blue in Folk Art Nautical, and I'm going to use that to paint on the sailboats onto the glass. Using a dry stenciling brush, just pounce that paint up and down. You are not, again, going for perfection here. Trust me, when you see the finished look, you'll understand why. You just want to get that paint on there and then carefully remove your stencil. Now this step is totally optional, but I had these bird stencils and I felt like it looked a little plain. So since this goes with another picture I made in another video that I will link here above, I decided to add a couple of birds with some white paint to each of the pictures. It was still looking a bit too plain to me, so I went in with some hot glue and then added a bit of twine to the inside rim of the frame. And there you have it, a lake vibe DIY number 2 done. And hey, if you're enjoying these DIYs, make sure you give me a thumbs up and make sure you subscribe. For this next DIY, we're going back in again with a bit of that folk fart. Not again. Folk art seaside villa. Oh, embarrassing. You're going to need a stencil and a small dry stenciling brush. We're also going to use Art Minds Antique Aqua. We're going to start with that folk art seaside villa, and then we're going to go on top of that with some of the Art Minds Antique Aqua. Neither hue needs to go on perfectly. You're trying to create a look of moving water with these two colors. Depending on the shape of your tray, you might not be able to put this completely around your tray. So what I did was on each of the ends, I just did a smaller version of the stencils that were on the sides. Now for this next step, you're either going to need some stencil film or some transferable vinyl, and then I let the Cricut machine do its thing. Now if you want this exact saying, you can get it from the At Jenny's Place free printable library. I will leave a link in the description below. However, it will be in a PDF, not an SVG file. I'm still working on trying to figure that part out. Using your Cricut tools, weed out the saying and then trim down any of the excess vinyl to size, and then use some transfer tape to place it onto your board and then burnish it down so that the vinyl sticks to the board. We're going to use the same combination of paints that we used to do the motif around the edging. So start with that folk art paint in Seaside Villa and then go in with a little bit of that Art Minds in Antique Aqua to add that deeper depth of color and to create that look of moving water. That dry for a bit and then carefully remove the vinyl. Now you could totally leave it here, but I felt like the one corner could use a little oomph. So I had these stencils, these two poppy flowers and dragonfly, and I decided to arrange those in the one corner. For the flower petals, I decided to use some sunset rose from Folk Art, just lightly applied that chalk paint to each of the petals, and then I used Folk Art's oatmeal. It's kind of got this light green color. It's subtle, not very garish, so I used that for the seeds and the stems. Then for the dragonfly, I just used the same painting technique we did for the letters and around the trim, and then just used a little bit of French linen for the center part. Finish it all off with the top coat. And there you have it. What a fun way to serve your guests during the summer months. It really doesn't matter if you're at the lake or in the city. Either way, this tray be stylin'. Okay, this next DIY is by far our easiest DIY, and to make it, all you're going to need is one of Dollar Tree's mop heads and one of their double sets of small wreath forms. Separate the mop strings out, and then I grabbed too many, but grab at least 4 of them, and then you're going to mix that up with a little bit of chalk paint that's been diluted with water, and mix it around until you coat all the strings. Now, I went with, again, that Seaside Villa Folk Art smart chalk paint, but you could go with any color chalk paint that you choose. And then just lay the wet strings out on something to dry. Okay, I realize circles don't have corners, but I cannot think of a clear way to explain this. Basically, you're making a life preserver. So you're going to use those colored strings and some hot glue, and you're going to glue one of the strings on each of the 4 corners, wrapping it around 5 times. Once you have each of those 4 blue strings in place, you're going to go in with just the plain white strings, and again with hot glue, adhere those to your frame, just wrapping it around. This time it doesn't matter how many times, you just want to get the entire wireframe covered. I wasn't really loving the two-tone, so I decided to go in with a little bit of that twine rope that came with a second DIY that we did, and I just used a bit of hot glue and attached this twine on both sides of the blue wrapped string. Now this next step is optional, you could stop here, but I decided to rough it up a bit with a lighter and just singe those strings, giving it a worn look. And there you have another lake DIY. For this next DIY, you're going to need 4 of Dollar Tree's faux wood tag signs. It really doesn't matter what it says on it. And using some wood glue and clamps, you're just going to glue the 4 pieces together. When that's had a chance to dry and set, you're going to remove the clamps. Then you're going to go in with a little bit of wood filler, and you're just going to fill that hole at the top of your tags. And then you're also going to use that wood filler along the edges to fill any of the spaces that might have been left by the 4 boards. Then sand that down so that you end up with a smooth edge, and it makes it look like it's one big giant board. Then I sanded down the front and gave it a couple of coats of white paint. Once again, you're going to need either that stencil film, or like I did, just use some temporary vinyl. I had a whole bunch left over from when I got my Cricut machine and colors I was never going to use, so I used them all up in this video. And again, if you're wanting these sayings, you can find them in at Jenny's Place Printable Library, and the link is in the description below. And then I just simply weeded out all of the letters. Now this does take a little bit of time, but it is definitely worth the effort. Use some transfer tape to transfer your image on the front of the wood plaque. Remove the transfer tape, and then going in with a little bit of black chalk paint and a small stenciling brush, you're just going to dab that black paint onto each of the letters that you see on your vinyl. That dry until it's set, and then using your tweezers and Cricut tools, carefully remove the vinyl from the plaque. For a little added touch, I went in with some sandpaper and just scuffed up the edges. I also made the mistake of trying to scuff up some of the letters. It messed up the lake. I did manage to fix it, but it didn't turn out as perfectly as it did in the beginning. So maybe skip that step and just do the edges and forget about the letters. Even with that mistake, I am absolutely in love with the way that this DIY turned out, but I'd love to know what you think. Leave it in the comments below.
If you enjoyed those, make sure you subscribe. Give me a thumbs up. If you hit that notification bell, it'll let you know the next time I upload. Oh, and you might enjoy these.